there's no escaping it. I mean, you watch Super Bowl and kind of think, okay, that's it, it's over. And then the next day, Riley Cooper gets cut and LaShawn McCoy's in the news for different reasons, and you're right in the middle of it all again.
I thought it was interesting that on Super Bowl Sunday, Nick Foles' name came popping up and Bradford's name as well. You wrote over at ESPN.com about Nick Foles. Do you think that even exploring this possibility, I know the connection with Peterson is obvious there, but what kind of road does that take the Eagles down?
Yeah, I don't think it makes a lot of sense, but, a lot of what we've seen here, going back to the 15th week of the season, is basically, the Eagles trying to kind of turn the clock back to the pre-Chip Kelly, good old Andy Reid days, and, having Howie Roseman and Doug Peterson running things, just like it's 2012 again, you kind of look at it and go, well, I mean, Nick Folsom would fit with that. I mean, it would kind of be consistent, at least, with the other stuff they're doing. But, it was the way I wrote it was kind of like, to me that would be going like a little bit too far down that road of just trying to, reassemble the team that Chip Kelly inherited before he started tearing it up. Foles is a solid guy. He's a good guy. I mean, they brought him back in some way, not by trading for him and getting that contract, but maybe by, if the Rams release him and he becomes available, you can just kind of sign him as a backup guy who could maybe be a bridge quarterback for a rookie that you might develop, something like that. That wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. I mean, I think Bradford is a better option because it gives you a better chance to actually, get a franchise-level quarterback out of the available choices. I mean, Bradford looks a lot like one of those for the second half of this past season, and obviously they had a lot of other problems that kind of would have affected any quarterback. But the Foles we saw in the last 2 years in St. Louis and the year before in Philly, I'm not sure I'd bring him back.
Phil, Sam Bradford, what are some of the key dates for him? And, what is your gut telling you? I know you guys made some predictions, one big offseason prediction for each team. Yours on the Eagles was, I believe, that you believe that they will get a deal done with Sam Bradford. So what are some of the key things between now and what is the key date for that to actually happen?
Yeah, well, the main thing, I guess, is March 9th is when the league year starts and, other teams can start signing free agents and that kind of thing. If they don't have a deal with Bradford done by then or they haven't put a salary cap designation on him, a franchise tag designation on him, he was going to hit the free agent market and just be available to anybody. That would kind of suggest that he's probably not going to be back. I mean, if you let him get to the open market, and that is, again, on March 9th, that's pretty much, saying that they're just not that committed to the idea of bringing Bradford back. And that's fine. Again, I'm not against the idea of moving on if you have a better plan. I mean, you've got to have an answer to that question if you're the Eagles. You can't just say, Sam Bradford was a Chip Kelly guy. He brought him here. We're not really interested in him. He wasn't that good for us. Whatever the reasoning is, we're just going to let him walk. That you can say that, but you can't do that to me unless you have an alternative in mind and a solid plan for following through on that alternative. With the 13th pick in the draft, you can't just say, okay, we're going to get a quarterback because there's 12 teams ahead of you that might take a quarterback, and a couple of those teams really need quarterbacks. So you're going to get the third best option at quarterback in this draft, which is not a strong quarterback draft. To me, and Nick Foles to me is not the answer for your franchise quarterback going forward. So if you have a better solution, if you're Howie Roseman and Doug Peterson, and you've got a better plan, then let's see it. But just letting Sam Bradford walk without coming up with anything better, to me, would be a disaster.
Yeah, it seems like there's not a lot of great options out there. I was talking before you came on, Phil, that with your ceiling with him is much higher than any of the other options that are available through draft or free agency. But I guess the price tag will be a big thing. And as you write over at ESPN.com, is he a Chip Kelly guy? And if so, are those guys in a full situation?
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of that. I mean, Howie Roseman is, has a history of kind of, being dismissive of people that he didn't have anything to do with, or he didn't bring into the mix, whether they're players or coaches or other personnel people that work for him. He's gotten rid of a lot of guys, or let a lot of guys leave, or he drove away a lot of guys, however you want to put it. he didn't get along with. So there's a little bit of that with Howie. And, the Riley Cooper move, that one wasn't so hard to justify. I mean, he was making a lot of money and was not really producing anything like the level of contract that he received. So, you could certainly justify that based on the money and the production you got for the money. But, he's also a guy that was connected to Chip because Chip stood by him through the whole racial epithet incident a couple of years ago, and then gave him a big contract after that year and made him a starter. Started him almost every game for the 3 years Chip was here, even though he never really produced the way some of the guys he got rid of, like Deshaun Jackson. You compare their numbers, and Deshaun Jackson's a better player, but there's Riley Cooper starting for you because he could block. I mean, there's a lot of stuff like that. So there are guys that, that are Chip Kelly guys. I mean, he either drafted them, brought them here, started them, played them, even if they weren't necessarily what a lot of the rest of us would have done. I think those guys all have a little bit of a target on their back as Howie Roseman and Doug Peterson take over control of the team.
Phil Sheridan, ESPN.com, NFL Nation. So who are some of the guys who right now are vulnerable? Bradford, I guess, you look at DeMarco Murray, who we talked about a couple of weeks ago, but who are some of the other guys that Howie Roseman might look to either move in a trade or do something different with?
Yeah, there's a bunch of guys. I mean, you look at, first off, you start with the Oregon guys. So you have Josh Huff, who's one of the few wide receivers left on the roster now that they've gotten rid of Riley Cooper. But, Huff's a guy that they took in the third round, passed on some players that are pretty good. To take him instead, he hasn't been very much of in terms of production for them for the last couple of years. But, they don't have a lot of alternatives at wide receiver. So, just look at it straight on without, him being Chip Kelly's guy or an Oregon guy, and he'd probably stay just because of the numbers. But because of the Chip Kelly connection, I think that could change the equation with him a little bit. There's guys like Taylor Hart and Brendan Bear who are Oregon guys that, defensive ends in the 3-4. They're not going to play a 3-4. So guys that Kelly brought from Oregon to play in his defense, they're probably guys that I would worry about my status a little bit if I were them. Kiko Alonso, too. I mean, that's all they got back for trading away the franchise's all-time leading rusher. Did not play real well last year, obviously. What he's got going for him is that he's cheap in terms of salary cap. Is less than $1 million coming off his rookie deal. And Jim Schwartz, the new defensive coordinator, worked with him for a few months before he tore his ACL in Buffalo and liked him and was thinking of how to use him his defense there. So it's possible that he'll survive that. But you have guys like that, even like D'Amico Ryans and Jason Peters, who are just they were here before Kelly and have reputations that had nothing to do with Kelly. But Kelly kind of identified them as leaders and guys that he talked very highly of all the time, and sort of became Kelly guys while he was here. But now they're just guys who are a little older and coming off of sort of down seasons because they're not physically holding up that well as they get older. So guys with big cap numbers who get into their 30s and don't start playing as well and are hurt a lot, they all become guys with targets on their back.
Phil, you mentioned Cooper, and they did release him, and I think a lot of people didn't have a problem with it. But what kind of message and what does that leave now for the Eagles? I mean, was now the right time, to release Riley Cooper?
I mean, I thought doing it the very first day that they were allowed to. I mean, Monday was the first day that you could release players that were on your roster from last year in the NFL. So the Giants released a couple guys today, a couple offensive linemen, and I think John Beeson got released. I mean, this is a week teams start to do that. But the fact that they did it the very first day, the very first available moment they could get rid of Riley Cooper, I thought that was a little bit of a statement by the team. But I mean, other than that, if he's not going to fit in your plans. And, he was here as a player when Peterson was the quarterback's coach a couple of years ago. So he knows him. He's seen what goes on him from the last couple of years. I mean, if he's not going to be on your team or fit into your plans, it doesn't make sense to just say, all right, we're going to, clear almost $3 million in salary cap space, so we're going into the offseason knowing that space is available. So I think the timing was a little bit of a message, doing it as quickly as they did. But doing it this week is about, it's about the time the NFL teams start doing that with guys that they don't plan to keep around.
Yeah, and Cooper obviously had his issues here and did not really produce following that. I mean, he did have the year that got him that contract, Phil, but he was never able to come close to those numbers. And he was very effective in that year. He averaged almost 18 yards a catch in that 2013 season. Why was he not able to get back to those numbers? Was it, Deshaun Jackson being gone? Was it that they just didn't call his number? I mean, he gained that contract based on that he was very productive for that season.
Yeah, it's a weird kind of combination of things, I think. I mean, what you mentioned is part of it. Deshaun Jackson was the other wide out on the other side. It took a lot of attention away. Even though Jeremy Maclin is a good player the next year, he's not quite the deep threat that Deshaun Jackson is. He's not as fast. He's not as explosive, and not the kind of guy that teams react to that way. So there was that aspect of it. Then you had the Nick Foles regression. We all talk about Nick Foles and the 27 touchdowns and 2 interceptions in 2013. Riley Cooper got 7 of those touchdowns. I mean, Foles and Cooper together had a thing going that was, it was pretty promising for the Eagles at that point. So Cooper got the big contract. Foles was coming into the season as a starting quarterback. Then in 2014, Foles kind of regressed. The offensive lineman had some injuries. There was a bunch of problems going on. The offense generally wasn't as productive and as explosive as it had been, and they just couldn't get it going. And then Foles got hurt, and you basically had Mark Sanchez finish that season, and then Sam Bradford could take over this season. So for a season and a half playing with Sanchez and Bradford, neither of those guys ever developed that kind of connection with Riley Cooper that Foles had back in 2013. Foles didn't have it again in 2014, but again, the offense, there were a lot of changes there. Deshaun Jackson leaving and the offensive line being a little bit unstable, I think all had a lot to do with that.
Yeah, Phil, and I think one of the major interesting, intriguing parts about this offseason coming up is Jim Schwartz being hired as the defensive coordinator. I saw the very early power rankings at ESPN, and one of the things they said was this team is kind of an unknown. It seems like when they hired Kelly, they were an unknown then. No one knew what to think of them. They seem similar, but one of the things that they mentioned was that Schwartz took a Bills defense that was kind of nondescript and made it the best in the league. So I guess if you're looking at the Eagles, one thing to be excited about is the fact that Schwartz is now here, and they have some talent on that defensive side of the ball, and maybe that talent wasn't being used the right way.
Yeah, that's kind of a point. I was writing about that today, and it really strikes me that, when you talk to Chip Kelly, a lot of times over the last 3 years, he would talk about, I don't have an offense, like, a system. I look at the players I have, I look at the quarterback especially, and then I build the offense around what everybody does well. But he was determined, no matter what, to come in here, take a 4-3 defense that was built a certain way and run a 3-4 two-gapping scheme that was totally different from what the Eagles were used to and what they had the players for. So for 3 years, they were adjusting as they went. I mean, Trent Cole went from defensive end where he was a Pro Bowl guy, not the outside linebacker where he was just another guy. They brought Connor Barwin in to be the other outside linebacker. He took guys like D'Amico Ryans was a great middle linebacker in a 4-3. Now he's an inside linebacker in a 3-4. Fletcher Cox goes from defensive tackle to defensive end in a two-gap scheme where he's not quite as explosive or able to do the things he did. Schwartz said on the radio station today something about, Vinny Curry was a guy he was really excited about when he was coming out of college. Thinks he can really be a great pass rusher, and it's one of the reasons it kind of explains why they re-signed Vinny Curry, because the new defensive coordinator wants to take a guy like Curry, who was really mismatched in a 3-4 scheme, and get him out of defensive end and let him just go after quarterbacks. I think the fact that you have a guy that really wants to take the talent that's there, because there is some talent there, take the talent that's there and really kind of just be aggressive with it and do what the players do best to try to get the quarterbacks and be disruptive. I think it's very, very promising for the Eagles.
Phil Sheridan, ESPN.com, NFL Nation. It's funny, you wrote the piece about this earlier today, about defense dominating the Super Bowl, but the quarterback is still vital. We kind of talked about yesterday on the show about how Newton was the number 1 pick. Von Miller was the number 2 pick. They face off in the Super Bowl. Miller gets the best of it. So is quarterback still the be-all, end-all? I think most people would surmise that it is. But defense and the Schwartz conversation we just had, it's obvious that defense is still a very major part of getting to that Super Bowl and who ends up ultimately winning it. It still seems like, Phil, defense wins championships.
Yeah, it does. And, there was a little break there where, the Saints, when they won the Super Bowl a couple of years ago, they had one of the worst defenses in the league, and they have continued throughout the whole time. Basically, Sean Payton's been there. They've been just terrible on defense. So there was a little stretch there where the offense seemed to be almost everything. But the last couple of years has been a kind of welcome return to that. Seattle, Russell Wilson is, a really good quarterback, but that defense is obviously the thing that carried that team. So I think you've seen a little more of a return to a balance there. The point I was trying to make was that, while this is good, if you like defensive football, and Philadelphia Eagles fans have the history of, really liking defensive football. And it's something that I've kind of missed the last couple of years. You're covering a team that's given up 35 touchdown passes, for example. And it took like 2.5 seasons for a Jim Johnson defense to give up 35 touchdown passes. So they were doing it, in 16 games the last couple of years here. So, I just missed what it used to be like with a good, aggressive, playmaking defense. But you still need a quarterback. And while people are kind of talking about the defense as being more important now, and the fact that the Broncos did what they did on defense while Peyton Manning had one of the lesser games of his career in terms of stats and production, the fact is they still had Peyton Manning. I mean, they still had a quarterback that could go out there and make the plays necessary to get them, keep them in the game and do the right things. And, the Panthers' defense is very good, and they played really well in the Super Bowl, but they're not in the Super Bowl without Cam Newton scoring 45 touchdowns, and it's 35 throwing and 10 on the ground, and winning the MVP of the league. So, it's very good that Jim Schwartz is here to get the Eagles back to what they used to be on defense, but the quarterback position is still, 1 or 1A in terms of what they have to do right to make Doug Peterson have a chance to be successful.
Well, I guess if you're going to have a mid-level quarterback, getting that dominant defensive player becomes a must.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can win, and the one example everybody always gives is the Trent Dilfer year with the Baltimore Ravens, when the Ravens defense was, a real force to be reckoned with, and they won the Super Bowl that way. I mean, you can occasionally pull that off, but I think, the real formula is you can build a great defense with, a lot of good players and a really good scheme, really good coaching. But you need an elite quarterback for the most part in the NFL. If you're going to win, you look around, just at the last 15, 20 years, it's hard to see a lot of teams, except for that Ravens team, the Brad Johnson Tampa Bay Buccaneers team. But otherwise, you can say, well, the Giants had great defense, and Eli Manning is not an elite quarterback. People have made that argument. But Manning's won 2 Super Bowls, and he made some plays in those Super Bowls and on the road to those Super Bowls that were, pretty impressive. So I kind of give him the elite quarterback ranking at that point. So to me, you need both. And, the Eagles have tried very hard in the last couple of years to get the quarterback right. They haven't done very well, but they've tried. And, getting defense right is another big part of it. And they clearly did that completely wrong under Chip Kelly.
It's like the NBA. You got to have 3 stars now. I mean, you got to find that guy on the defense to be the big star, and, of course, you got to have that quarterback. Phil, you covered T.O. when he was here. To you, is it an injustice that he did not get a Hall of Fame induction this last weekend?
I didn't think so. I was, I don't have a vote. I mean, the process is different in the NFL. Like in baseball, all the baseball writers with the baseball writers card get to vote. And here it's about, 40 or so media members get into a room and they all discuss it and then vote in the room. So it's a little bit different. But I thought, his numbers are ridiculously good, and he's a Hall of Famer if you just look at the numbers. But what he did to the teams he was on with his behavior and his personality, 3 different cities, San Francisco, Philadelphia, and Dallas, he acted out and caused problems and basically brought teams to the point of falling apart completely. The Eagles had to get rid of him. The Eagles went to the Super Bowl with him, and that was a Hall of Fame player that took them, through that 2004 season. But it was the evil T.O. that deserved to have to wait a year or two. That brought that team to its knees in 2005. So I think he's going to get into the Hall of Fame. I think he probably should get into the Hall of Fame. I'm glad that he had to take a year to at least, be reminded, and everybody else had to be reminded the damage that he did when he was a player. Because he was a great player, but he was arguably the worst teammate I think I've ever covered in the 30 years I've been covering the Eagles.
Well, yeah, obviously, the fact, though, that he was 37 years old and almost had 1,000 yards playing in Cincinnati his last year, I mean, that says something about the talent that this guy has. But you're right. I mean, he was a disruptive force, not only on the field, but in the locker room. Phil Sheridan, ESPN.com, at Sheridan Scribe on Twitter for more Eagles offseason news. And we'll keep our eye on what happens with Sam Bradford. When is the franchise date? When do they have to make that decision?
I think this week is the first time you can start doing it. I think it's at the end of this week or the beginning of next week. And then you can do it, I guess, at any point. But you have to do it. It would only make sense to do it when the league year starts, which is March 9th. So I would think between now and then we'll know what they're going to do. My sense is that they won't do it, and I can understand that the franchise number for quarterbacks is going to be in the 20s. $20 million, $25 million, that range, depending on what the salary cap ends up being. So when you're looking at that kind of money for a one-year commitment, and then the guy can then leave at the end of that 1 year, that's just a lot of money to invest and a lot of salary cap space to devote to somebody who might not be there. And to have an unhappy quarterback is not a good thing for a team. The Eagles have twice used the franchise tag, and it really blew up in their faces with Jeremiah Trotter and Corey Simon. Both ended up having the tag rescinded because they were really unhappy about it. Both left via free agency anyway. So they've used it twice and had it really kind of blow up in the face like a cigar. So they've had that history. So having that with your quarterback would be, it'd be tough with your middle linebacker or defensive tackle. But having your quarterback feel that way and be unhappy, that would be a disaster. I think they're very likely, going to try to either figure out a way to get him to sign a reasonable deal, which he's got no reason to do because his agent is a guy that Tom Condon is a guy that wants to get the maximum deal he can get for everybody that he represents. So getting him cheap is going to be hard, maybe impossible. And other than that, they're going to probably look for alternatives.
All right, we'll keep our eye on Bradford, of course, and Fletcher Cox. He's coming up as well. A lot of news surrounding him. Phil Sheridan, ESPN.com. Thanks, Phil.
Yep, appreciate it, Mike.